You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Have you ever noticed that the friendships that you make around the role-playing table tend to be very long-lasting friendships in your life? Is there a reason for that? My name is Robert Walker. I am the author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system, and this is my show, where I teach collaborative storytellers how to create memorable campaigns using psychology. And on today's episode, we're going to be delving into the idea of friendships formed around the Dungeons and Dragons table or any other role-playing game. But there is something about those friendships that really bind people together, as our guest today is going to help us understand. So let's get to the interview and meet our guest.
My name is Tom Sanderson, and I am the host of the podcast Tom Meets Interesting People, where we will interview everybody from voice actors all the way to nuclear engineers, and we talk about their life, their work, their passions, and what gets them going in the morning.
We're new friends, but I think we're like kindred spirits. We've been talking just for a few weeks now, but we've already found out how much we have in common, how much we both enjoy role-playing games, and we've had some really fascinating conversations already. But today, I'm hoping that Tom and I will be able to discuss a few things about D&D that he learned while he was in college during his dissertation.
Thank you for having me, Robert. And yeah, like literally, we could have hit record at any point during the past 2 or 3 weeks, and we'd have a podcast episode straight away. So yeah, it's great to finally be doing this properly and formally with our fancy studio.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So tell me first, one thing I always like to learn from my guests when they're on the show, and my cyclothids like to learn about, is what first got you into role-playing? What's a little bit of your background in the RPG community?
So I got into role-playing because my partner got in touch with an old friend. And the friend was just like, sort of, I want to play D&D. I need players. And I knew nothing about the system. I knew nothing about the game. This is about 6 years ago at this point. And so I just went along and we played the first part of Princess of the Apocalypse, which is very much now a very cursed game for me. I've tried to run it about 3 or 4 times. It's just not worked. And from that first session, I had my character, my very first character as Conrad. He was a rogue. He was I was trying to kind of do a little bit of a Jack Sparrow if he was a little bit younger, sort of like that dashing kind of character. And I had a lot of fun sort of just slipping into something different, something that wasn't nerdy me. And yeah, from there, I played more games. I met a few extra people through the group. I then played more games, and now I'm sort of, I think a mind flayer has just taken over me now. I am now just here. And I can't remember how I got here.
No, that is the way that it happens. Somebody gives you the first bit of the drug for free, and then after that, it's your whole life is, how can I get more of this drug?
Yeah, literally, like it. After Session 2, I brought the Player's Handbook. Session 3, I brought the DMG. Session 4, I brought Salavars. Then my bank balance cried. Then I got paid. Then I brought some more. And then I discovered loads of third-party stuff. And I discovered Nord Games and Kobold Press, and I fell in love with their stuff. Then I gave it a go. Myself, I ran Lost Mines of Vandelver from the starter box, and absolutely that like cemented how much I love DMing. And then Lost Mines sort of turned into a bad attempt at, Yeah, I think it turned into a bad attempt at Princess of the Apocalypse that just didn't work. Like, that module just doesn't work for me. I've now currently got my current campaign, which is working in this setting called Midgard.
Oh, yeah.
Where they are, I've completely just diverged, but you know what, so what? They are currently dealing with the Ghoul Imperium, who are a mobilized force of undeads, vampires, and undeads working together. And as the players are finding out, there's more nuance to it than just being the bad guys. And I'm very excited for them to find out who has been who has been bankrolling the local gang.
Plot twist ahead
in the city. Yeah, I know.
Those are always fun. They're my favorite. Like, I think plot twists, even if they're just small little things that make your characters go, aha. Those kind of moments really are immersing for players.
Yeah. And they add nuance, don't they? And they add like you had one of your players play the big bad.
Yes.
For goodness knows, was it a year and a half?
Yeah, it was. I think it was close to by the time that campaign wrapped up. I think the big reveal for that came at about a year in, at which point the party sort of splintered. The bad guy went to his bad guy area and stayed there for the party to finally come down and face off against him, which didn't take too much longer, maybe 2 more months for them to get from the reveal to the final confrontation. But yeah, it was a pretty big plot twist. One of the ones that we never stop talking about because, goodness, I have people who still have bad hurt feelings over that, and also great memories as well. So yeah. Controversy and triumph all in one.
Yes. That just makes a podcast as well. Controversy and triumph.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of like the driving factors in all great storytelling. So back in university, you did research into Dungeons and Dragons, which is super fascinating. I got to watch your final presentation that you did as part of that research, which was excellent, by the way. You sounded very much like a Dungeons and Dragons professor. But your research was on, it was great. It was on forming and maintaining friendships in the shared experience of a tabletop role-playing game. Can you tell me a little bit about that research and what you found?
If I start with kind of the background behind it, and then I'll go into the findings. So it started as a second year project, and I'm really lucky at the University of Northampton, where I was doing my undergrad, that we are allowed, under very close supervision, with supervisors breathing down our neck, but it's quite right too, to conduct research in second year. And the research I wanted to do was looking at friendships, because that's a topic I'm really, really interested in. However, when I was doing my literature review, both in my second and my third year, I found that all of the research that was published on relationships were just on romantic relationships, and they were given a lot of weight. And yet, second year was also my COVID year, was COVID year for everybody, actually. And a lot of us relied upon our friends as well. And there was research to show that friendships are just as important to our continued well-being as our romantic relationships. So why isn't the amount of research reflective of that? So that was like the big driving force behind it. And at the same time, I was just completely immersed in D&D, and it's all I wanted to do. So I got very lucky that both times round, I've had the most wonderful, fantastic supervisors. It started in second year with simply qualitative interviews, where I interviewed one-on-one, and I asked participants sort of like about the games that they played, what kind of friendships that have been formed in them, and to tell stories. It was basically a podcast episode, more or less. And anyone who's done qualitative research will say they've had that thought of, this should be a podcast.
Yeah.
And the results were, they were quite promising. They sort of highlighted shared experience, and they highlighted a sort of sense of togetherness. And so I kind of took that, and in my dissertation, I continued to research and I really expanded on it. And I expanded the study from one-on-one interviews to large groups. So what I elected to do was get two different groups together, sort of side by side, but they wouldn't be in contact. And the two groups would play the same adventure, which is Hollow by an author called Richard Pear, who I highly recommend. Really should give him a shout out.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely love it. It's if you're a fan of kind of pagan myths, and sort of like the kind of horror of what's in the forest, you'll adore the adventure.
Yeah, it sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, you'll absolutely love it. And I also picked it because it's one of those adventures that actually requires the players to work together, because the Hollow Man, as it's called, that's where the title comes from, is way above level 1, and you have to use the environment, you have to collaborate and work together. So that was my little bit of manipulation of the study, where I had the two groups and they played for 5 weeks in total. There's a bit of nuance between sort of like week 1 being session 0 and 2 to 4 being the gameplay and observation. And I was present in every single session, but I didn't take part. We did this over Collaborate, which is basically just our version of Zoom. And so I was a silent observer in all of the games, only stepping in should I need to, if somebody's well-being's at risk or if there were technical problems with anything that was happening. And then in the final week, once the adventure was finished, I had a focus group, keeping each group apart still. And I asked them questions that were based not just on the game that they played, but also the relationships they formed, the friendships that they sort of made. And it was an utterly wonderful one, because I found out that one of my groups has stayed in contact, which I know is slightly sort of, people are like, why are your participants staying in contact? But it's also a sign of, look, this study has shown this friendship has been made, and they have elected to meet up outside of the study. So I'm super happy about that.
Yeah.
I got invited over to the Natural History Museum as well to sort of attend an event there. That was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
After those interviews were done and we transcribed them, I then analysed them using interpretive phonological analysis, IPA, because I was really interested in the sort of meaning of what people were saying, because something that I'm kind of fascinated with. Something we do over here in the UK is when we ask someone, "You all right?" we don't mean, "Are you all right?" We just mean hello.
Right, yeah.
And I find that really interesting. And there was a lot of that was kind of showing up in the kind of transcript that was sort of like unintentional double talk.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty similar over here. We say, "How are you doing?" It's kind of the small talk point where everybody's just sort of expected to say good or fine. And anything other than that deviates from the norm.
Yeah, and no one knows how to react after it. But we came up with 6 kind of findings, and these were: we all play a role in our friendship. So there are those in a friendship group that facilitate the group, and others sort of take part. You can kind of do a bit of cold reading and kind of work out which one you are. We're part of something that can be shared within a group. We share in that experience, we share stories with one another, and we create things to share with each other. Communication and empathy are big factors in maintaining a friendship. Like sort of showing understanding and kindness, like especially in regards to communication and communication preferences, go really long way to show that we care. The pandemic very much changed the way that we made friends.
Yeah.
I think anyone can say that. You don't need a piece of research to tell you that. Friendships were more easily formed out of convenience just by seeing the same people on a day-to-day basis and just repeating those interactions. And the most fascinating one for me was safety when meeting a new person was a big concern. And I was like, why is that a thing? And the study ended up kind of providing a safety net for meeting new people. And my 2 female participants literally said they would not have met the other participants in the study in any other kind of environment.
Yeah.
The study provided that safety net because there was that screening process behind it.
Mm-hmm.
To take a quote from one of the manuscripts, the researcher would not have brought on a total dickwad. And,
scientific language.
Yeah, the scientific language. And there was even sort of like a kind of discussion, and I kind of want to see where this research sort of takes us with friendships and sort of creating those shared spaces, about emails and how if this wasn't in the context of a study, she wouldn't have even shared her email. And as a cis white guy, I don't need to worry about any of these concerns.
Right.
But it did open my eyes to, wait, these are things people actually have to worry about?
Right.
And so I'm definitely kind of now in this little period of reflection, trying to think, okay, what could I do that kind of helps make the world a little bit better? But yeah, for the future of this, Masters is going to be coming up next year. I haven't quite decided where I'm going and what I'm going to be studying. And then I'm going to do that thing that can only be considered as highly foolish and try and shoot for a PhD.
Yeah. One thing that really comes to mind as you're talking about this study that you did and these 6 factors that you were talking about friendship, all of those things are present in D&D, which is phenomenal. I mean, you're talking about, you have a facilitator, the empathy, the shared experience, like communal, all these things are part of what happens around the D&D table over the course of an adventure, that continued interaction, on a weekly basis or whatever it is for your games. So everything that is involved in the factors of a friendship are the factors of a D&D game, which I think you and I were talking about on your show, and makes so much sense about why it is that D&D friendship seems to be the ones that last the longest. Like they pervade over the course of your life, because you do have all the factors of a lasting friendship right there at the table every week.
Yeah, and something I would absolutely love to do with this is expand on the research, further refine what those factors in friendships are, because I think anyone with an academic background will tell you this is equivalent of maybe the first draft.
Yeah.
And sort of further refine them, introduce some quantitative measures.
Sure.
Definitely, like, I want to see, okay, this was my group. My group was full of just people who were in the same culture. They were in the same environment. They were people who were pulled from social media posts. So it just went mad how many people are asked to be a part of the study. Big social media post asking for people who play tabletop role-playing games. And so already that had the kind of cultural factor.
Sure.
Where it's like, these people already have some sense of that shared experience. They already kind of have the cultural context of Dungeons and Dragons. So that could have been something that affected the results. So I would like to take it further and be like, was that something that did add on to the friendships, add on to the relationships, or is there other kind of factors? And yeah, if my career was just spent researching friendships in psychology, and we can see sociology coming in as well, I would be very happy.
For sure. Especially if you got to do it by observing and playing D&D all the time. Like, that makes it even better.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it's not work, it's play. I was super lucky that Liz Gulliford was one of my supervisors. And she was utterly amazing. She's like the biggest source of support that I had through my dissertation. And even though she's never played D&D, although she's promised me she's going to play it now, she was absolutely there for like everything that I could have needed, and any support I needed. She was just there, and she was just epic.
That's awesome. Yeah, having good support in your education is amazing. Like, I can definitely look back and think of the people who are the most supportive are definitely the ones I learned the most from as I was going through the first part of my education. And even now, like, this first part of my master's degree has been daunting, but the instructors have made it very accessible. The information has been pretty easy to comprehend because they've presented it in a very understandable way and been there all the time. Like it just makes such a big difference having people who are invested in your success.
Yeah. And if you'll forgive the tangent, we in academia, there's definitely a shift because Northampton is a fairly modern university. It's got it is quite a progressive university, but there does need to be that shift in academia from, oh, just here's a reading list, off you go, to actually contextualizing that reading list into your content of the lectures and making that reading list accessible.
Right.
Yeah, as somebody with dyslexia, I struggle with the written word. It takes me double the amount of time to write an essay or anything than compared to somebody who doesn't have dyslexia. And just with reading as well, we mentioned this kind of on talking about goals. I have to start at the end because that gives me an anchor point, because otherwise it completely ruins books for me. Because otherwise the text is quite literally moving about the page. I can't keep it in one place, and it's really difficult to try and express what that kind of means. So I have to kind of start at the end, because then that gives me an anchor point, and then my brain can kind of lock them slowly kind of into place. But obviously, reading back to front isn't conducive to understanding what the context or what you're actually reading. So yeah, I have to read it backwards, and then I read it forwards.
So with my fascination with psychology, you talking about having dyslexia makes me already start to think about maybe this is part of what draws you so much to Dungeons and Dragons, is because it's a form of storytelling and story immersion that you don't have to struggle with reading, or you don't have to, spoil the ending before you get there, so to speak. You can just sort of experience or tell or be part of the entire story process in a more natural way for you as a person.
And if I get the names wrong, if I get names of towns or people kind of mess it up, or I know there are certain word sounds and combinations that just don't work for me. No one needs to know.
That's true.
It could just be my little kind of thing. It's like, no. His name has always been Jeff.
Exactly. That kind of leads into another interesting point about DMing, which I always find fascinating, is how the difference between what a DM is trying to create and knows and what the players experience and know. Because, of course, a DM is always comparing their game to what they expected their game to be. But the players don't ever know what you expected your game to be. They only know the game that was run. So a lot of DMs, I think, can beat themselves up like, oh, this didn't happen exactly the way I wanted it. But really, that doesn't matter. If the players are having fun, if they're immersed and they're having a great time, it doesn't matter what it was supposed to be. It was still something great,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like players kind of don't care. And certainly me as a player, I don't care if my DM has it perfect or not. All I care about is spending time with my friends, telling a story where I get to be just a little bit kick-ass. And I don't care if that particular nuance of the DM's plot line didn't quite work. I don't mind that. Now, I say this knowing I am also the DM to completely second guess every single plot point that I do. And I am my own worst critic.
Exactly.
I should listen to what I am saying. But I don't.
That's the hard part, though, right? Because you're always going to critique like, oh, man, I had this great idea and it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. But on the other side, you have those other moments where, like, you throw in a silly NPC and your players just latch onto them. They have this great interaction. They become their favorite new NPC. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, that was one of the most fun sessions ever, over something you didn't plan at all.
That literally happened last week, or the week before, rather. I introduced a undead kind of gang, if you will, in the city of Seawell. And they were very much sort of based on the Peaky Blinders. I've been watching a bit of Peaky Blinders. I like the Peaky Blinders. I was having a bit of fun doing a really bad Arthur Shelby impression. And I thought, you know what, best way to kind of introduce them, and also because it's sort of like part 2 of a long-running campaign where we've all got new characters, I'll make it a combat encounter so everybody can flex a little bit, they can sort of test out their characters and whatnot. And I did a speech for him because I thought, you know what, I'm DM, I can have a speech. And I ended up accidentally sort of making a kind of dead rights activist.
Yes.
And what I thought would be, oh, the players are seeing these gangsters pushing merchants around. They were taking notes. They were like, we agree with his philosophies and
I love this.
his politics. And yeah, his methods are not what we would like, but now we have this entire subplot with them helping the group they call themselves the Forsaken.
Oh my god.
Helping them to get more rights in a city where the living and the undead live together. And so, yeah, it's just derailed into this absolutely brilliant sort of like undead rights crusade that has accidental sort of real world connotations that I'm definitely sort of being very careful with.
Yeah, for sure.
And like doing my research. But yeah, it's just one of those cases of just, you know what, players take the wheel. See what happens.
And that is the beauty of collaborative storytelling, because yes, you might write a great story, but no matter what, if you're all in on the game and your characters, your players are all in, no story is going to be as great as the one that you all create together. And I think that's just the beauty of a collaborative story.
Yeah. I know it's also that shared experience as well, which is like kind of the title of my research, bringing it back around. One day we'll get it published. We have that kind of shared experience with each other because, like with your group and the big bad evil guy being one of the players, or with my group and them finding an undead gangster who actually just wants equal rights for all. You have those moments like we shared that with each other. We have that experience that's just for us. And by virtue of only us having that experience, our friendships become stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with the whole basis of your research. To me, makes complete sense. I think to any long time or even short time D&D player, of course, it is sort of almost like self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, it's going to show that it creates great friendships. Why doesn't this research already exist? Because so many groups around the world have been creating friendships in this way for so long now. It only makes sense to delve further into this research, because I truly believe the whole point of this show is the idea that human psychology is so very linked to role-playing games, and it is like our best modern experience of storytelling. It's like the new medium of being able to pass parable and wisdom and learn through shared experience.
Yeah, and that's how we like sort of developed as cultures, as societies. Yeah, it was sharing those stories. And you also picked up on a point there that is like a common criticism of sort of psychology and the social sciences. It's people from a certain perspective might say, oh, we already knew that.
Yeah, the hindsight bias and all of that stuff,
One thing I like to come back to them with is, well, way back when, at the start of World War One, during World War One, we had soldiers come back with shell shock. We now know that is actually PTSD. Now, with hindsight bias, you could say, oh, yeah, we already knew that, but we didn't. We didn't have a name for it. We didn't have what its properties are, what are the factors that are affecting it. We didn't develop any treatments at the time because it was just shell shock and left over there. And even the change in name from shell shock to post-traumatic stress disorder is a reflection of us building that understanding of what we might already intrinsically know.
Right.
But having those words and having the concepts defined for us can help us sort of zero in on our research. That's the wrong word. Help us sort of
refine it.
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. Refine our research and actually do the work needed to help people. as opposed to just running around with a headless as headless kind of chickens.
PTSD is an excellent example of what you're talking about here, because it is one of those things that, yes, we sort of had shell shock, and hindsight bias would tell us, oh, yes, we already knew that. But still, we're learning how to more effectively treat it. We're learning about what other traumas it can be associated with. And I think one of the greatest strides in the last 10 years is learning that there are very specific treatments that are good for it. Like you look at the psilocybin and its use in PTSD, which is something we're just now sort of accepting, that this drug in a shared experience, a guided experience with a therapist, can be very, very therapeutic to those with PTSD. But we wouldn't be at this point if we weren't continuing to refine our research and push it forward.
It's just a really fascinating area to kind of look over, to see that we're now kind of incorporating sort of drugs into sort of research with PTSD. One that I'm finding really, really interesting that I want to keep up with, and I hope continues to get funding, is also the use of virtual reality in the treatment of PTSD. I'm finding that really fascinating, because as something that I absolutely adore in my reading and in my research is having that thing to point to and say, this is the thing that is worrying me, or this is the thing that triggers me, or this is the thing that I am feeling right now.
Right. It is very important to continue furthering this research, all research in the psychology field. And you're right, that hindsight bias does give a lot of people like a talking point of like, oh, yes, we already knew this. But even if we did know it, just understanding the correlations that can be made, the other associations that we can make with things.
Yeah. And for those who aren't a fan of psychology, it's like, why are you listening to this podcast? With physics and I want to say astrometrics, because that's Star Trek, but that's not the correct field. Like, we didn't understand until I think 100 years ago that Pluto existed, and we only now have changed the definition based on what we can understand about planets, what our understanding is, to classify Pluto as a dwarf planet. And I'm still mad at Neil deGrasse Tyson for that, because it's like, it's still valid as a planet,
right?
And it's just that's what kind of like what science is about at its core. If you remove a lot of the issues that the academic community has over here in the UK with the unions and fair pay and publishing, that's kind of what science should be about. It's refining our understanding and building upon each other's work collaboratively as a group, as a species, to find that understanding that we need to make the world a little bit less crap. I understand the world too, but make it less crap.
I 100% agree with that. All right, so I'm going to throw you to the wolves now and ask you some questions in Tricks of the Trade. Okay, so for my Tricks of the Trade segment today, I want to continue this discussion about friendship, and I think that's the perfect thing for you and I to talk about today. Is so the question would be, let's each come up with one or two ideas on how you can foster perhaps new friendships, or let's just say, people coming together maybe for the first time. What would be a good icebreaker for a DM to use to bring people together at the table?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I think one fun thing to do is open a game with a question and answer period, or maybe even like a silly game. Like you could do a would you rather round around the table and just get everybody to kind of share something ridiculous about a sort of a fantasy idea anyways, because it does evoke imagination and it gets everybody talking and laughing. I will say a round of would you rather might be a good icebreaker.
I like that one. I've got two that come to mind. The first is assuming that they have the context of D&D and the tabletop role-playing game, is to ask them for what's been their favorite moment so far in any games that they've previously played. Like, we connected very quickly talking about different kind of moments that we kind of had. We connected on my podcast as well. We connected over our chat. We were just sharing these stories.
Absolutely.
That's kind of like a great kind of icebreaker. Food I find works really well with
Oh,
my
yeah.
own friends. I will make food and cakes, and it's the only time I'm actually allowed in the kitchen because otherwise I make a mess, and the other half is just like, no, Thomas, get out, get out, get out. Yeah, so definitely with that, finding something that you all share, I think is a great way to kick off any kind of relationship. I think also communication is a big thing, having empathy and just taking the time to understand
Mm-hmm.
the people who are around you and taking the time to take note of preferences that are mentioned, take note of what people want to do. Obviously, at the same point, not losing your own things as well.
Right.
And yeah, having that communication, having that empathy, having those shared experiences, and food.
And food. Yeah, because they bring all those things together.
Yeah.
I think for my last idea, I would say the question you asked me on your show, which I think it would be a great question to ask everyone around the table, is what sort of class would represent them in real life, and just get people discussing that topic would be a very good way to go about it as well. Yeah. Awesome. So as we wind down, before we leave, let me give you an opportunity to tell my cyclothids where they can find you, talk about your show, talk about your other projects, your radio project. What is it, DH9 Radio that you work with there?
DH9 Radio. Yeah. So I do everything. I don't know where I'll find the time, but whatever. So on social media, I could be found either on Twitter at Tom Spaceboy, or if you want the social media for my podcast, which is Tom Meets Interesting People, where I interview interesting and wonderful people like yourself.
Thank you very much.
And we talk about your work and your passions and your life. You can find that anywhere you'll find your podcast, on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts when it updates in 2026, because it just takes forever to update. Yep. You can find my show on TikTok at Meets Interesting People, Instagram at Tom_Meets_Interesting_People, Twitter at Tom Meets People. If you want to just get directly in touch with me, TomMeetsInterestingPeople at gmail.com. I will reply to everyone because I like people, even though I'm an introvert and a hermit. And I need to have a rant about introverts and extroverts at some point. I'm also a panelist on the show Illuminati, which airs Saturday and Sunday at 7 p.m. on dh9radio.com. And I think that's it, actually. Yeah, that's most of what I do. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been...
I don't have a book yet.
Not yet. Yeah. I didn't think I would ever have one either, but you know what? Sometimes you just wake up with that passion and you have to get it out of you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to stay in contact with you and chatting. Before we sign off, is there anything that you have upcoming or anything new that you're working on?
I think just the biggest thing that I have kind of coming up is we'll be finishing off this season 1 of Tom Meets Interesting People. There will then be what I'm going to call a reflection episode, where I'm going to invite other people to kind of come, and it's still kind of in the concept phase, but send in messages and sort of talk about the season. And then very much I'm already starting to make plans, and I'm already starting to take bookings for season 2.
Awesome.
And that will probably be out New Year, maybe? Yeah. Let's find out.
Perfect.
Let's see what happens. Everything's up in the air right now, and I sound so organized.
I get it. It's a lot to balance, a show and life, work, family, all that stuff. It's a good time. But speaking of season 1 and season 2, I just want to remind my listeners that season 1 will be continuing through the end of October. We will do our season finale on October 30th. Then we'll be taking a 2-month break as the show reformats and updates a little bit and comes back to you at the start of the new year. So again, thank you, Tom, for joining me. And
thank you for having me.
Until next time, cyclothids, we will see you next session.